ask for a backup computer to plug it in. If I can borrow that, that would be great.
All right, everyone, please be seated. Counsel, you may continue.
Your Honor, at this time, the state calls Lauren Satcher to the stand.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Before you're seated, please raise your right hand and take the oath.
Do you swear or affirm the testimony that you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Please have a seat and position yourself close to that microphone.
My apologies, Your Honor,
Sure.
I'm transferring. Okay. Good morning.
Good morning.
Can you please state and spell your name for the court reporter?
My name is Lauren Satcher. That's Lauren. Satcher is Satcher.
Where do you work?
I work for the Georgia Bureau of Investigation in the Division of Forensic Science in the Firearms and Toolmark section.
And what is your title within that section of the crime laboratory?
I'm a Firearms and Toolmarks examiner.
And can you describe your educational background and professional qualifications as they relate to firearms and toolmark examination?
So I got my degree in biology with a minor in chemistry from William Carey University. Then I got my master's in forensic science from the University of Southern Mississippi. Once I graduated, I started with the GBI and entered into the GBI's training program. It's about 16 to 17 months of training that includes things like firearms design and manufacture, ammunition design and manufacture, toolmark examination, muzzle to target distance determination, serial number restoration, and then months and months of microscopic comparisons.
And in that capacity, as those requirements are, can you tell us what kind of practical work is required to get certified as a firearms and toolmark analyst?
How do you mean?
Did you do any mock workups or any presentations or things of that nature during the course of your training?
So throughout the training, it's divided into blocks of training. So like toolmark examination would be one block, serial number restoration would be another block. During these blocks, it's a lot of research, things like that, practical work, practicing on the microscope or doing serial number restoration, whatever that block of work is, a lot of hands-on practical work. And then at the end of each block, there is either a written test or a practical test or a combination of a written and practical test. At the very end of training, you have a mock case, so you're given a fake case that you work, and then you have a mock trial.
What happens if you get any portion of that not 100%?
So you have to make a certain percentage on the written test. For the practical test, every aspect of it has to be correct. If you fail a test in any of the blocks of training, you go back through some remedial training in that block, and then you have a second attempt to pass not the same test, but another written or practical test in that block. If you fail the same block twice, you look for another career. You're no longer moving forward in the firearms and toolmarks training at the GBI. In addition, if you were to fail a block of training and then later down the road fail 2 other blocks of training for a total of 3 fails in different categories, that would also have you eliminated from the program.
You get terminated, you get fired, right?
Right, as a firearms examiner at least.
Right, okay. And that includes Toolmark practicals as well?
It does.
And did you perform all of those practicals and certification tests that you just described?
I did.
And were you certified as a firearms and Toolmark examiner for the Georgia Bureau of Investigation?
So I successfully passed all of the training with the GBI to become a firearms and toolmarks examiner.
Okay. How long have you been employed in that process, in that position, rather?
I started in August of 2020, so 5 years.
And can you tell us what your primary responsibilities are as a firearms and Toolmark examiner?
So my main job is looking at ammunition components like bullets and cartridge cases to determine if they were fired from a particular weapon, as well as looking at tool marks left behind on other objects, doing serial number restorations and muzzle to target distance determinations.
And can you tell the jury, when you do analysis, what kind of tools do you utilize to enable you to do so?
So the thing that I use the most would be a comparison microscope. So that's basically 2 microscopes like you'd see in a high school connected by an optical bridge. So what this does, it lets me see 2 different things at the same time under the same magnification. So I can put something on one side of my microscope and something on the other side, and when I look through that eyepiece, it's like there's a split down the middle so I can see both things at the same time.
And how many samples do you think that you've examined under your microscope in the last 5 years, estimated?
Thousands.
Okay. Would it be fair to say that sometimes you are able to make a comparison?
Yes.
And sometimes are you unable to make comparisons?
I can make comparisons. I can't always come to a conclusion.
Okay. With respect to that, how would you define the frequency with which you can come to conclusions? What I mean by that, I suppose, is it always, only sometimes, oftentimes? How does it work with firearms and toolmark examination in that regard?
Well, there are a lot of factors that come into play. So when I'm making a comparison, I can either come to an identification. So this bullet or this cartridge case was fired from this firearm. An elimination, these bullets or cartridge cases were not fired in this firearm. It can be inconclusive, which means there's just not enough information there. Or it could be unsuitable, which means there's really nothing there to be compared at all. So a lot of factors can come into play on whether or not I can come to one of those identification or elimination statements. Sometimes it has to do with damage. So if something's really damaged and there's not a lot of information on that object, it could be inconclusive, which basically just means there's not enough information to tell one way or the other. So as far as how often I can come to a conclusion, it really just depends on the case. I'd say oftentimes we can come to a conclusion, but there are sometimes you'll go through a streak of cases that are just inconclusives.
Okay. And you're not looking for a particular outcome, are you?
I am just there to see what the evidence has to say.
Okay. Can you briefly explain what forensic toolmark analysis, I know you mentioned some about the firearms, what forensic toolmark analysis is and what the role of a forensic toolmark expert entails in those circumstances?
So a firearms identification is actually a subset of toolmark identification. So the theory behind toolmark identification is that the harder object is going to leave markings behind on the softer object, okay? So a lot of times what I'm looking at is firearms, and in that case, the firearm would be the tool. So the tool is the thing that's the harder object that's going to be leaving behind the markings on the softer object. So firearms identification is a subset of toolmark identification because in this case the firearm is made of a stronger metal and it's leaving behind markings on the softer metal of the bullet or the cartridge case. So when we're looking at toolmark examination or toolmark identification, we're just broadening that out, and instead of just looking at firearms, it's looking at different tools and the objects that they were used on. So that can be things like bolt cutters on padlocks or wire cutters on wires. So basically we're just looking at whatever this object is. The harder object would be our tool, and looking at the markings that it leaves behind on the softer object.
Would that include knives and saws, things of that nature?
It would.
And potentially, would those leave behind marks on items such as bone?
They could.
Okay. And is the Crime Laboratory Firearms and Toolmark Examination Division subject to the same accreditation procedures as all the other divisions within the Crime Laboratory?
We are.
Do you undergo the same requirements of peer review on your work product?
So in the firearms section, we have a two-step peer review process. There's verification and then peer review. So if I'm the primary examiner, after I work a case, it goes to my verifier. That is someone who gets the evidence and they make the same comparisons that I did without knowing what my conclusion was, and they come to their own conclusions. So that would be my verifier. At that point, if we're in agreement on whatever the conclusion was, that's when I make my report, make sure everything is in the case file, and then a third firearms examiner, who is not me, who is not my verifier, will then go into the case file, go through all the documentation, and make sure that everything on the report is supported by all the documentation in the case file.
Did that happen in connection with this case?
It did.
Can you tell the jury what proficiency testing is?
So proficiency testing is something that we undergo at the GBI. Basically, an outside vendor has a series of tests, whether that be a firearms PT or proficiency test, looking at bullets or cartridge cases. We could have toolmark PTs. The type of tool can vary. Serial number restoration PTs, and muzzle to target distance termination PTs. Basically, the outside vendor has a big group of these testings that goes out not just to us, but to other labs as well. And they have the ground truth, which basically just means there's somebody waiting at the end with the answer sheet, right? And so throughout our time at the GBI, we will get proficiency tests, where we get this test from the outside vendor. We go through our analysis like we would if it were a case, and then give our results to that outside vendor, who will then let us know if we reach the expected results.
And, excuse me, were you subject to proficiency testing?
I am.
And I'm assuming you're still employed?
I am.
Okay. Are you required to document, I believe you said you create reports, is that correct?
That's correct.
Can you tell the jury how your notes and your reports are performed during the course of an examination?
So while I'm doing my examination, I have different worksheets that I'm filling out with things like class or different characteristics that I'm seeing. As I'm working my case, I'm filling out these worksheets. We're looking at things called class characteristics and individual characteristics. So class characteristics are things that are determined by the manufacturer. So basically, whenever a tool, whether that's a firearm or a different type of tool, is being made, the manufacturer is going to have certain specifications on, we'll look at tools, we'll say how wide that tool is, whether it's serrated or smooth, things like that. The manufacturer is going to determine before the manufacturing process ever starts what that tool is going to look like, certain characteristics of that tool, how long it is, how wide it is. So things like that will get noted in the worksheets, documenting any trace evidence that we might have observed on these tools, just kind of documenting as we go what we're doing and what we're seeing. At the end, we are coming to our conclusion on whether or not we have an identification, an elimination, inconclusive in regards to any tools that were submitted compared to the tool marks. And so that's also going to be documented inside the case file. So all of this documentation is put together in the case file, and then the report that comes out are our conclusions. So that's why we have that third step, our peer reviewer is looking at everything in the case file, all that documentation, to make sure all the conclusions that are in your report that are stating here are the findings, those are supported by the documentation.
Does that assist you when you come to potentially testify in a court of law concerning a prior examination or analysis that you've performed?
It does.
And given the number of cases that you just described, how many on average do you think you handle a year?
A year?
Or in your, whatever is the easiest way for you to define it?
I'll say in my time of working cases, I've worked somewhere between 200 and 300.
Okay. And specifically, have you ever testified before in the field of forensic firearms analysis and tool marks?
I have
How many times?
41.
Okay. What counties?
Liberty, Chatham, Glenn, Camden, Ware, Richmond, Bullock, Fulton, Jeff Davis, Wayne. Could be more. That's all I can think of at the moment.
Okay. All over the state, basically?
Yes.
Okay. Have you ever been denied status as an expert in the field of forensic firearms analysis and tool marks?
I have not.
At this time, Your Honor, I would seek to offer Lauren Satcher as an expert in the field of forensic firearms analysis and tool marks.
Any objection?
No objection, Your Honor.
All right, then she's so qualified, you may continue.
Thank you. Just so I'm clear, have you always been a firearms and tool mark analyst for the crime laboratory?
Since starting with the GBI, yes.
Okay. Are there limitations to tool mark examination? Meaning, what would make it more difficult for you to render a conclusion with respect to tool mark examination?
So looking at tool mark examination, we'll say, as opposed to firearms examination, which again is a subset, but bullet's only going to travel down the barrel of a gun one way, right? When it comes to tool mark examination, there's a lot more factors that you have to take into account. So for instance, how was that tool used? Was there any leverage involved? What part of that tool was used? So if you have, let's say, bolt cutters where the blades are this long, the padlock, the bolt's not that big. So where on that cutter was used to cut that padlock? So you have to take other things into consideration with tool mark examination, like how that tool is used. Tools aren't always used in the way that they were intended to be used. So you have to take that into account, which direction they were coming from. Did they come from multiple directions? And then again, where on that tool was used relative to whatever it was being used on. So all of these things together can add some limitations, but just, I'd say, more complications than if we were just looking at, say, a firearm, where again, it's really only being used in one way.
So for example, if I were to reference a blade on a knife, is it possible that the mark was made by a different potential segment on the knife?
Objection, leaving.
Can you rephrase that?
Certainly. Can you explain to the jury how the length of a knife blade might impact your tool mark examination analysis?
So again, we kind of have to look at the size of the thing that's being cut relative to the tool that is doing the cutting. So again, if you have a cutting surface that's however long and whatever it's being used on is much smaller, you don't know for sure where on that blade was used, and if you have multiple things you're comparing it to, you don't know for certain if the same part of that blade was used on every item because that blade is longer than whatever the item is. So again, that's one of those complications that comes in with tool marks, that things you have to take into account.
Okay. If I can approach for just a moment. My apologies, Your Honor. I believe the other item is behind the witness. Now, in preparation for this case, well, let me back up one moment. Were you asked to analyze any items in connection with this case?
I was.
What items were you asked to analyze?
So I had some segments of bones, a deer processing kit, and a knife.
Okay. Can you tell the jury, does the firearms and Toolmark section follow the same standards and protocols for evidence submission as the other areas within the laboratory?
Yes.
How does that work with the bones themselves? How did you get those?
So those would have been submitted by the medical examiner's office.
Okay. Do they go in through the locker or do they come in a different fashion?
It has to go through our evidence receiving. So I'm not exactly sure how they would have gotten these from the medical examiner's office, but it has to go through the same procedure as all evidence that's coming from a medical examiner's office. So it has to be submitted through evidence receiving, where it's given its own item number, case number, things like that, entered into our laboratory information management system. Pictures are taken of it, how it was submitted, things like that, before it can come up to me.
Okay. And did all of that occur in this case?
It did.
Did that happen with respect to the bones themselves?
It did.
Did that happen with respect to the knife?
It did.
And did that occur with respect to the deer processing kit?
It did.
Do you have two of those items in front of you now?
I do.
Can you tell us the exhibit numbers, the little red tag on the knife first?
States Exhibit 1.13.
Okay, and the deer processing kit, what number is that?
2.25C.
Okay, and let's talk first about the knife. Do you know who submitted that knife?
That would be Region 5, GBI Region 5.
Okay, and when you received that knife, can you tell the jury what a suspect tool is?
So a suspect tool is a tool that was taken off of whoever the suspect is or from their property. They have that tool that's connected to a person, and they usually, the reason it's being submitted is to see if we can determine if it was the tool that was used.
Okay, would that also involve tools at crime scenes?
They would.
Okay, and specifically the knife in your possession there, was that a suspect tool?
It was.
Okay, and can you tell us if there's a difference to suspect tools versus the deer processing kit that you're also holding?
So the knife was a suspect tool, so something that was connected somehow to the crime, whether through a suspect or through the crime scene. The deer processing kit, I knew beforehand that it was not connected to the this kit itself was not connected to a suspect or a crime scene, but it had been purchased by either the DA's office or an agency to be compared to markings to see if they had the same class characteristics.
Okay, so are there limitations when it's not a suspect tool?
Yes.
Can you tell the jury what that is?
So knowing that something is not a suspect tool, I am not going to be looking for individual characteristics. So individual characteristics are things that are incidental to manufacturing. So when that tool is made and there's a lot of metal-on-metal interaction that's happening, and it's leaving behind microscopic imperfections on that tool. These are individual characteristics specific to that tool. So that's why when I'm doing my comparisons, first thing I'm going to look at is class characteristics, the things that the manufacturer determined, like width, shape, things like that. If those are in agreement, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to look for individual characteristics. So those microscopic imperfections, because I'm trying to determine if that specific tool was the tool that was used. However, for the deer processing kit, when I was made aware on the front end that this is not a suspect tool, so I am not going to do that individual comparison because I already know that it's not the tool. So I'm not going to look at individual characteristics to compare them to try to determine if it is this specific tool because I've already know that it's not.
Okay, and Can you tell us, when you received the bones, did you do anything with them to process them?
I did.
What did you do?
I cleaned them off, and then I wrote item numbers, and I gave each end letter designation, so end A and end B.
Why did you give them letter designations?
Because I knew that one side was made by the medical examiner's office. One side was cut by the medical examiner's office, and the other was the suspect cut. So I needed to have a way to differentiate which side I was looking at for investigative purposes and which side was the cut that was made by the medical examiner's office and I could disregard.
And I was just going to ask, did you do anything with respect to any of the cuts made by the medical examiner's office?
I did not.
Why not?
Because I knew they were made by the medical examiner.
Okay. And the other end, those were the ends that you were examining, is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. And in anticipation of your testimony here today, did you prepare a PowerPoint presentation with the slides of the work that you performed?
I did.
Okay. And I'm going to hand you a series of items. I want to ask if you recognize them before we commence. I am showing the witness 1.102A through O. Counsel, I'm showing this to you. Those photographs. May I approach?
Yes, ma'am.
Do you recognize those photographs? Take a moment to go through them.
I do.
Do you recognize them?
I do.
What do you recognize those photographs to be?
These are photographs of the bones and then casts that I made of some of the bones and then some photographs of a piece of lead wire that I made some cuts in with saw from the deer processing kit and a close-up of the teeth of the saw of the deer processing kit.
Are those all photographs that you yourself took?
I did.
Are those a fair and accurate depiction of, or just photocopies rather, of the original photographs?
They are.
At this time, I would seek to introduce those photographs, Your Honor.
No objection, Your Honor.
And they are admitted without objection.
Thank you. At this time, I'd also like to provide her with 1.103. I'm handing you a 2-page document. Do you recognize that?
I do.
What is that you're holding?
It is my report.
Okay. And do you recognize that to be the report that you prepared in connection with your conclusions concerning the knife and the bones?
I do.
Is that a accurate report, just a photocopy of the original?
It is.
Does it have your signature on it?
It does.
At this time, I would seek to introduce 1.103.
No objection, Your Honor.
It's also admitted.
Okay. Now, can you tell the jury, I'm going to start with your PowerPoint. The PowerPoint itself, does that have any notations that you made as well? Meaning in the margins in addition to just the photograph?
Yes.
Okay. And did you do so in a fashion to attempt to assist the jury in understanding your processing of the materials?
Yes.
At this time, Your Honor, I would seek to introduce that as a demonstrative aid, that being listed as photo PowerPoint within the subfolder of Lauren Satcher under witnesses on 1.101, the USB.
No objection to it being admitted as a demonstrative, Your Honor.
I have this photograph separately, Your Honor, before the court.
Thank you. It is admitted.
At this time, may I publish, Your Honor?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. I'm going to go to slide number 1. And can you tell us, what is that number that's depicted on the screen?
That would be the DOFS, or Division of Forensic Science, case number.
Okay. And does every case have its own unique number?
It does.
Do you recognize that number as associated with this case?
I do.
And did you document that in your report?
I did.
Can you tell us what's in the very first slide that is here? One moment. Where it says item 23.
So item 23 would be the humerus bone. What we're looking at there is those markings in the center of the bone.
Okay. And with respect to that bone, were either of the ends of that bone examined by you?
They were not.
Why not?
Because both of the ends were cut by the medical examiner's office.
Okay, so that was from an intact bone that was provided to you being basically cut out by the medical examiner?
Correct. So the medical examiner saw the tool marks and then just cut out that segment of bone and only submitted that portion of the bone.
Okay. And can you tell us, what did you do with this segment, number 23, when you received it?
So again, I would have cleaned it off and then given it wrote the item number on it. You can kind of see on the left, I've designated one side A and one side B just so we can orient the bone. And then just kind of...
Does that assist?
There we go. And then just documented the presence of what I call false starts.
Can you tell us what a false start is?
So a false start is any cut that was made that was not finished. So a terminal cut would be a cut that's made all the way from top to bottom and it severs, like what the ME did, where they completely severed. False starts are cuts where they started the cut and it was never finished. I just call it a false start.
Okay. Can you tell what the difference is between a false start and a deep false start?
So a deep false start is just a type of false start. These are pretty shallow false starts. A deep false start would just be that cut that goes deeper into the bone before it stopped. So it doesn't go all the way. It's not a terminal cut that completely severs, but it's a deep false start if it's going far into the bone, but is not actually used to completely finish the cut.
Okay. Well, when you first received the knife that you have, if you could actually, there are gloves if you'd like to your right. If you could show it to the jury, I'm referring to the, not the deer processing kit, but the first knife. Can you tell the jury what you did with respect to that knife when you first received it?
So when I received this knife, the first thing that, again, I'm going to look at is class characteristics. So I'm looking at things that are easy to determine, like the manufacturer, documenting the width, the length, the type of blade. I'm looking for any trace evidence that I can see just with my naked eye on here. And so I am just basically, at first glance of this knife, giving an overview of all of the different characteristics that I'm seeing of this knife.
Okay. And would that include the type of knife that it is, meaning is it serrated or smooth, things of that nature?
Yes.
Okay. And would you document that?
Yes.
Okay. And with respect to this knife, did you note any individual characteristics?
With this knife, I never looked for individual characteristics on this knife because I didn't do a comparison of this knife to anything at an individual characteristic level.
Okay, why not?
So I was able to determine that this knife was not used on the other 4 bones based on a disagreement of class characteristics. Basically, this knife, it has a beveled edge, so it kind of goes in. So the cut that it's going to make is going to be a V shape, okay? And as we'll see a little bit later with some of these bones, where you can see the floor in these false starts, what's called the kerf floor, is in a W shape, which tells me that we're not looking at a knife that leaves the V-shaped floor, as well as some patterns that are consistent with tooth hop on the bones.
I'm going to slow you down for just a second. You said
Sure.
tooth hop?
Tooth hop,
Okay. Is that Tooth, tooth hop?
correct.
Okay. And what are you referring to when you say the word tooth hop?
So when you're looking at some of the bones, you can see what kind of looks like peaks, or I guess valleys. Basically what this indicates is the presence of teeth on whatever tool was used, because as that tool is going into the bone, and as each tooth hits, it's going to make a motion like this, and the teeth themselves can leave impressions behind on the wall of the cut. So looking at the wall of the cut, you can see what's consistent with tooth hop, which basically just is that little hopping motion that's happening as whatever tool was being pushed into the bone. And as each tooth is introduced and causes that up-down motion, it's leaving predictable waves or peaks or valleys or motions.
Okay. Now you said that this knife had a V shape. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. Now I'm going to put us onto the next slide. Can you tell us what's depicted here?
So this is a photograph that I took under my microscope. So we're looking at that same bone. So it is the humerus. We're looking at those false starts kind of from the side there. So you can see that they're pretty shallow. And that's just documenting those false starts on that humerus.
Now I'm pointing to a section right here on the very far left. Can you tell the jury what conclusions, if any, that you could make with respect to that mark?
So looking at this bone, I was not able to eliminate or even compare to the knife, the problem being that area that you were just indicating. I can't tell, because there are so many false starts here, I can't tell if what I'm looking at there is 2 different false starts, or if it's one in the shape of a W. So there's basically too much noise going on with all of these shallow false starts. So I can't determine exactly the characteristics that I'm looking at, even in that section. It could be the W shape that's indicating some teeth, or it could be 2 different false starts from a knife with a V shape.
So would it be fair to say that you are super conservative when it comes to your analysis?
Objection leading.
I'll rephrase. How does that impact your analysis when it comes to multiple false starts versus a saw tooth pattern?
So in this case, with this bone, just because there are so many that I can't really determine confidently where one false start is compared to another, especially on that side that has a little bit deeper of a cut. Because I can't with any confidence make a determination on how many false starts are right there, I am not going to speculate on the shape of the false start.
Okay. And the tool marks that you see on the farther right portion of this bone, to the right of the letter 3, or the number, I should say 3, did you draw any conclusions there?
No.
Same analysis?
Yes, so for this entire bone, it was the same story. There's just too many shallow false starts for me to be able to confidently give any characteristics to it.
Okay, but you tried.
I did.
Now I'm going to turn to, and just so we're clear, you said the humerus. What part of the body is that?
It's the arm.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to turn now to the next slide, item number 24. Can you tell us what you observe in this slide under item 24?
So this is a different bone. We're looking at the suspect cut side. So the part that's down that is not in focus, that's the side that the ME cut. So we're not concerned with that side. What I'm looking at on this end of the bone, you can see there's a couple very, very, very shallow false starts right at the top of that, top to the right of that side of the bone.
Your Honor, may I approach the witness for just a moment? Would it assist at all? I don't know if it won't show up perhaps on that monitor. I don't know that it would help. I was going to try and give her that. If you could just maybe for the record then indicate where you're referring to on the picture. Is it on the right side or the left side of the bone?
So on the right side of the bone, you see two little scratches.
Are you referring to this section right here? You said two scratches?
Yes.
Okay.
So that would be some very, 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 very shallow false starts. And then farther to the left, you can see that big, yes, that area right there, where you see that big trench. That would be a deep false start. So again, that false start where that tool started to go down, and then before finishing the cut, it was taken back out.
Okay. And if we scroll down to the next slide, can you tell us what's depicted in this slide of item 24?
So here we're looking at the floor of that false start. So these cut or saw marks are called kerfs, K-E-R-F, kerf. So in this picture, we can see the width of that kerf and a little bit of the floor of that kerf. So here I'm measuring the width because the blade that made this cut cannot be wider than the cut itself. So if you have a blade that's 3 inches wide and you have a cut that's 0.07 inch or 0.067 inches, obviously that blade did not fit. So we're looking at the width of the cut or the false start that was made, because that can give an indication of what type of tools could or could not have made the cut.
Okay. And you indicated that this one was a kerf floor. Is that right?
You can kind of see the kerf floor. So again, if the saw or cut mark is the kerf, since this one wasn't finished, you can see the bottom, and my measurement's a little bit in the way there, but you can see how it's kind of making a W shape.
Okay. And what does the W shape to you indicate as a Toolmark's analyst?
So a W shape like this is typically indicating a saw, like a crosscut saw, basically meaning that the teeth of the saw are kind of at angles. So as that that tool is sawing, the teeth are cutting in on either side, and then there's that W shape as it comes up in the middle where the teeth aren't at.
Okay. And so how would that reflect with respect to the knife that you have held up for the jury?
Again, so since that knife would make a V shape, it's not going to make a W shape like this. It has that beveled, non-serrated, no teeth edge on that knife.
Do you have any way to do Toolmark analysis on human flesh?
I do not.
Why not?
Well, it's, for one thing, it's too malleable. It's not going to pick up those markings from the tool. And in addition to that, I didn't get any. So I can only work with what I have.
Would you normally cut human flesh as part of your analysis?
No.
Okay. And So you don't have any way, withdrawn, do you have any way of knowing whether or not that knife was used on the flesh of this deceased?
I have no way of knowing that.
Okay. I'm now scrolling to the cast, that's item 24 cast. And just so we're clear, can you tell us what item 24, what that was, what bone?
The right femur.
Okay. And would it be fair to say, how many segments of bone did you look at?
5.
And which were those?
The right humerus, and then the right and left femur, the leg side and torso side of both femurs.
So would it be fair to say both sides of the cuts?
Yes.
Okay. And 24, you said, was the right femur?
It is.
Okay. I'm now scrolling down to that cast. Can you tell the jury what's depicted here in the cast?
So during my analysis, I looked at the bones themselves, but I also took casts of the bones to try to see if there were any other characteristics that were visible when I casted it that I couldn't see by just looking at the bone. So the reason it looks brown is it's a Accutrans cast. It kind of looks like a caulk gun, and you put that material onto the bone, let it set, and you can pull it off. So that's what we're looking at here, is the casting of the bone. What I'm showing here is a pattern that's consistent with the tooth hop. So remember, during that sawing process, as the different teeth come into contact with the bones and it causes that tool to move up and down, it can leave behind waves or valleys kind of like this that you can measure, and it can give an idea of the distance between two teeth on the saw. So in this cast, looking at two different areas where you can see a very consistent measurement between the different peaks or the valleys left behind.
Okay. And with respect to your analysis, did you have a suspect saw to compare?
I did not.
So the only suspect tool you had was what?
The knife.
And you had made a conclusion with respect to the knife already, is that correct?
That's correct.
With respect to each of the femur portions, were you able to determine if each of them had characteristics that would be something that could allow for inclusion or exclusion? I don't know if I phrased that too complexly. Let me maybe try again. Did you have a chance to look at each of those 4 bone segments?
I did.
And when you looked at them, were you able to find a kerf floor for each of those 4 segments?
I don't believe each one had a kerf floor.
Okay, let's turn to them then. And let's look at item number 25. Can you tell us what's depicted on this slide?
So item 25 is the left femur.
Okay,
What we're looking at here is that projection on the end there, that's a bone spur.
can you tell us what a bone spur is?
So a bone spur is, you see that piece of bone that's jutting out. So how that happens is when you're cutting, and as you get close to the end, that portion isn't cut, it's actually fractured off. So think about when you're cutting something, when you get close enough and there's just not enough holding on anymore, instead of you having to cut all the way through, that last part will just break off. So that's what we're looking at here, is just the bone spur, or the part where it didn't actually have to be cut, because when we got close enough, the force was enough to break it the rest of the way without having to be cut.
Okay, and are bone spurs always present?
Not always.
Can you tell us why bone spurs would be present or would not be present?
Objection, Your Honor, I believe this is outside her field of expertise.
Your response?
Your Honor, I'll rephrase it to make it perhaps easier. I'm going to scroll back up to slide 23. Do you see this slide?
Yes.
Are there bone spurs on this slide?
No.
Why not?
A bone spur is only going to happen when there is a terminal cut. So when it's the cut that makes all the way to completely sever whatever the object is. So without having been completely severed, you can't have a bone spur.
Okay, and in a scenario where a body would potentially be on an autopsy table, would that impact the ability for there to be a bone spur or not?
So since a bone spur is formed by the force, basically, of the saw coming down, some of that's going to come down to how the object is being supported. So yeah, how the object is supported can determine whether or not there's a bone spur.
Okay, so I'm now going back down to slide number 25. In this case, you indicated that there was a bone spur, correct?
Correct.
And which portion of the body was this bone number 25?
The left femur.
Okay. Did you do a cast of that bone?
Of 25?
Yes.
I did.
Okay. And can you tell the jury what item 26 cast is of?
So item 26 is also the left femur, but the other side of the left femur. Again, we're just looking at that pattern on the cast. So I cast all the bones twice, just to compare casts to each other to see if I'm getting the same thing on both. And you can see in item 26 cast as well, we're getting those kind of valleys that are in kind of a predictable pattern and the same spacing apart, which again is consistent with two top.
And so would that also be consistent with what type of a instrument?
It's consistent with a saw.
I'm now turning you to item 27. Can you tell us what is depicted here?
Item 27 is the other side of the right femur. And on the left side of that bone, we're looking down on it, you can see that, again, deep fault start visible. We're looking down from above.
Would that be just to the left of the letter A?
Yes.
Okay. And can you tell us, is there anything unique about deep false starts that are different than shallow false starts? And what I'm referring to is the types of tools that would be associated with that.
So deep false starts are more indicative of, say, a power tool, just because power tools take less energy. So if you have a deep false start and you were to pull that tool out, it doesn't take much energy to start a new cut, as opposed to with a hand tool where the user is the one supplying all the energy. If you've made it most of the way through the cut and you take that tool out, it's a lot of work, so it makes more sense to go back into the original cut.
Did you view item 27 under a microscope as well?
I did.
And what, if anything, did you find?
I also measured the width of that kerf for item 27 to see, again, we're looking at the width because I know that any blade that made that cut can't be wider than the cut itself. So for that blade to fit into that cut, it has to be that size or skinnier. So it's just taking measurements of that cut to have an idea of what width of blade we're looking at.
And would it be fair to say that you came up with measurements of varying points on the cut itself?
I did.
And can you tell us anything about how much of a margin of difference there was at the different points?
So for this one, it looks like the smallest was 0.064 inches and the largest was 0.070. So we're looking at a difference of 0.006.
Would it be fair to say then that that's fairly consistent through the cut itself?
Yes.
Now showing you item 27. Does that give any visibility to that you can describe?
So again, for item 27, we've got another measurement of the width. as well as in this picture in particular, you can very clearly see that W-shaped floor.
And that's indicative of?
A saw.
And item 27, what part of the bones was that?
The right femur.
Did you take a cast of that item as well?
I did.
Did you see any indicative markings that drew your analysis?
So again, on this cast, we can see a pattern that is again consistent with tooth hop, measuring at about the same distance as the previous ones.
Did you compare the bones and the casts to each other?
I did.
Were there any consistencies or inconsistencies?
So as far as individual characteristics, so I compared all of the bones to each other and the casts to each other to see if I could determine if they were all cut by the same tool, which I was not. I was neither a lack or there was neither an agreement or disagreement of individual characteristics. So in comparing them to each other, I could not determine if they were all created by the same exact tool. And looking at some of the class characteristics, there were similarities with the W-shaped curved floor and the distance between the pattern that was consistent with tooth hop.
Okay. Now, these next slides that are here, can you tell us why you placed them in here?
So for the next slides, I am looking at kind of stuff on the bones that we've already looked at. So the width of the kerf, the floor, things like that. Comparing them to the saw, class characteristics on the saw in the deer processing kit.
Okay, can you tell us what you found there?
So looking at those pictures of the bones on the right, we've already seen them. It's just showing again the width of that kerf between, here we've got 0.064 and I think our widest is 0.071 inches. And then on the left there, that is a cut that I made in a lead wire using the saw from the deer processing kit. So I've measured the width of that cut there, and I also measured the saw itself, which comes out to about 0.064 to 0.070 inches wide. Basically, all this means is that I can't exclude it, because remember before looking at those pictures, I said if the width of the blade was wider than the cut, then you can exclude that blade as being used. In this case, the width of the saw is not wider than the width of the cut, so I can't exclude it.
Can you show us what saw you're referring to in the deer processing kit? If you need to stand up, that's fine. And is that the saw that you examined during the course of your analysis?
It is.
Can you tell the jury what, if anything, you observed, and I'm now going to turn to the next slide, with respect to that blade?
So again, I measured the width of it to see if it was wider than the cut made in the bone, to see if I could exclude it. And then I also measured the distance in between the teeth of this saw to compare to that pattern from the casts of the bones that's consistent with tooth hop. So you can kind of see I have different measurements there on the teeth. That's because The teeth kind of come out at an angle. That's why it's leaving that W-shaped floor. And so the distance between the teeth that are kind of on the same side of the saw is about 0.227 inches, or 0.230 to 0.231, depending on which side you're on.
Did you take a cast of the saw itself?
I did not.
So that cast on the right is what?
The cast on the right there is of the bone item 24, which is the right femur. And it's looking at, again, that pattern consistent with tooth hop.
Can you tell us what's depicted in this last slide here?
So here is just showing on the left side, that is that lead wire that I cut using this saw. I did a terminal cut, which on the far left there, you see that circle towards the bottom is showing that spur. So as I made that terminal cut, when I got towards the end, the weight of that lead wire was enough to break off the very end without me having to actually cut it. So that's what you're looking at right there, is that point that fractured off instead of being cut off as I made that terminal cut. The circle on the right is just showing I did a false start. So I started the cut, just didn't finish it, so we could see what that curved floor looked like. It's kind of got a lopsided W shape to it. And that's just showing on the right the bone spur from item 25 and the width of the kerf on item 27. I can't exclude this tool. I obviously cannot say that it is the tool or it is this exact type of tool. I just can't exclude it.
Now, with respect to that being a non-suspect tool, would that have come into play as well?
Yes.
How so?
I'm not going to compare individual characteristics. So I, at no point, am going to compare the individual characteristics from this tool to the markings on the bones, because I know that this was purchased and it's not a suspect tool, so it's not connected. So I can't really go too far in depth onto whether or not it's this tool. Mostly with this, the most conclusive thing that I could have done would be to exclude this tool.
Did you know that up front?
I did.
So you knew that you were testing this and the only potential outcome was exclusion as a non-suspect tool?
Objection leading.
I'm
It is.
withdrawn. Is there a way that you would have been able to determine if this was included as it's not a suspect tool?
Objection leading.
That's not, so I'll overrule that objection. You can answer the question.
So as far as including it, I cannot say that it is this exact type of tool. I can do much less in terms of including it. Again, excluding it would be the most conclusive thing that I could have done, because if it doesn't fit, then it can't be this type of tool. As far as including it, at no point am I going to compare those individual characteristics to determine if it is this exact tool. And since we're looking at class characteristics, things that manufacturer's going to determine that's going to be part of a large group of tools, I cannot say it is this exact tool.
Did you look at the other items inside of that toolkit?
I did.
Can you take them out and show them to the jury, please? If we could, just as you go through each of them, can you tell us what conclusion you were able to render with respect to each tool and why?
So this is a butcher knife. It has a non-serrated edge, so a smooth edge. So this can be excluded because just like the suspect knife, it's going to leave that V-shape kerf floor, and it doesn't have any teeth that would leave that pattern consistent with tooth hopping.
Could you test that type of a knife against flesh?
I can't test anything to flesh.
Okay, what about the next item in the kit?
This is a boning knife. Again, it has a non-serrated edge, so a smooth edge that's going to leave the V-shaped kerf floor, and it has no teeth or no serrations on it. So I was also able to exclude this knife, or this type of knife.
And your exclusion is for what portion of the remains?
So that's talking about the left and right femur.
Okay. And the next item?
Steel rod. This is just for sharpening all the other tools. So,
And was there any reason to think that that was used in any way?
no. Caper knife, again, flat, no serrations, no teeth, so it leaves a V-shaped kerf floor and no pattern consistent with tooth hop because there is no serrations and no teeth.
Were there any other knives there?
One more. This is a drop point knife with, again, no serrations, no teeth, so it leaves a V-shaped kerf floor and no tooth hop.
During your examination, did you ever have an opportunity to examine any power tools?
I did not.
Can you tell us what the difference is between a hand tool and a power tool?
So a hand tool is powered by the user. Power tool is powered by some kind of other mechanical force like a battery, electricity, fuel, gasoline, something like that.
Okay. Can you render any opinion as to whether or not the deep false starts on items 24 and 27 were performed by a hand tool or a power tool?
Again, deep false starts are more indicative of a power tool because, again, you're having to use less user force. So it's a lot easier if you get a false start and come back up. It doesn't take much work to start a new cut. So deep false starts do tend to be more indicative of power tools.
If I can have just a moment. Your Honor, I have no further questions.
All right, Mr. Weinstein.
Examiner Satcher, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I'm Doug Weinstein. I believe we communicated this weekend.
Yes, sir.
Examiner Satcher, you had one suspect tool, correct, that you were asked to examine?
Correct.
And that suspect tool was the knife, State's Exhibit 1.13.
That's correct.
So you determined that that knife, do you have that knife in front of you now?
I do. Sorry, I just took my gloves off.
I apologize for making you put them back on again.
Sorry.
Okay, would you mind holding that up for the jury again?
Sure.
So that knife that you are holding right now, that suspect knife, you determined that that knife could not have been used on the right femur, correct?
Correct. So I determined this knife was not used to create those cuts on either the right or the left femur.
And that includes both the portion of the femur that you examined that was on the leg and the portion of the femur that you examined that was on the torso, correct?
Correct.
You didn't examine any other suspect tools, correct?
I did not.
You can put the knife away now, thank you. The other tool that you were asked to examine was not a suspect tool, correct?
That's correct.
And what was your terminology for that tool again?
The saw?
Yeah, the saw. You had a word for a non-suspect tool? Or you just call it a non-suspect tool?
A non-suspect tool, yeah.
Okay, so you examined that saw in the non-suspect tool, correct?
Correct.
And from that, you say you could draw, I guess, no conclusions? Is that accurate?
Pretty much. I can't exclude it, but I can't say it was that type of tool. So basically, there just weren't any class characteristics that let me say, okay, this could not have been the type of tool. But since class characteristics do turn, like, there's a whole bunch of different tools that are encompassed in class characteristics. Like, it's not just those types of saws that have teeth set that far apart with a width of a blade less than that cut. So there's nothing there that will allow me to exclude it, but I certainly could not say that it is that exact type of tool.
And I don't mean to test your memory, so if you need to look at something, just let me know. But item 27, the portion of the right femur still attached to the body, that had a deep false start in it, correct?
It did?
In a deep false start, you have testified a couple of times, that is more indicative of a power tool, correct?
That's correct.
And the saw that is the non-suspect tool, that is not a power tool, correct?
That's correct. It's a hand tool.
Let me ask you one other area. You make cuts into lead pipe. Is it lead pipe or lead wire?
Lead wire.
Lead wire. You make cuts into lead wire as well, correct?
I did.
And why do you use a lead wire?
So, for one thing, it is made of a kind of a softer metal. So, especially when we're using suspect tools, which was not the case when I made the cut with this saw. But when we're using suspect tools, we want to use as soft of a metal as possible because we don't want to damage the tool that we are trying to get markings from, because that is one thing that can leave individual characteristics as a tool is used and it picks up damage, you know, nicks, scratches, things like that. That's adding more individuality to that tool. So if we were to take a suspect tool and then cut something really hard with it, we could be potentially erasing some individual characteristics or adding new ones. So we always are trying to make cuts in a softer material, in which case at the lab we have lead wire. So all that I'm trying to do in this case was just to see what kind of kerf floor that type of tool would leave, and see if there's any other just characteristics that I could pick up from markings.
When you made the cut into the lead wire with the non-suspect saw, the width that you got in that cut was between, and you may need to look at the slide, was between, I guess there were three measurements, 0.092, 0.101, and 0.105 inches, correct?
Correct.
The width of the cut in the, I guess it is the right femur body, was between 0.064 and 0.070, correct?
Correct.
And didn't you testify that the knife that, for example, the knife that was used couldn't be any wider than that 0.064 to 0.070 width? Correct. Okay. And the cuts made into the wire, the 0.092, 0.105, and 0.101, those numbers are wider than 0.064 to 0.070, correct?
That's correct.
I have no further questions. Thank you.
Anything on redirect?
You appeared like you wanted to explain that last question. Can you explain that for us? Meaning the width.
So the reason that I could not exclude it based on the width, because that cut is wider, is because of the width of the actual saw. So before I ever made this cut, I knew that the saw itself was the width of the saw itself was between 0.064 and 0.070 inches wide. So that's the width of the saw itself. If that had been wider than the kerf in the bone, then I could have excluded it. However, because the saw itself is not wider than the kerf in the bone, I can't exclude it. It will fit. It does make, at least in the lead wire, a wider cut or a wider kerf than that in the bone, but that's not enough for me to exclude it, simply because the saw itself is not wider than the cut.
Is bone different than lead?
It is.
Did you try cutting the bone?
I did not.
Why not?
It wasn't necessary because I have the width of the saw itself. Again, the only way that I would exclude it is if the saw itself was wider than the cut, because that's how I know it will not fit. I'm not going to exclude it on the width of the cut that it makes.
Nothing further.
Anything else, counsel?
You say that the saw was up to 0.070 wide, correct? I believe you just told the state that.
Yes, 0.064 to 0.070.
So the saw is as wide as 0.070, correct?
Yes, so it's a range because I can't give, I'm measuring it, but I'm measuring at different points in different places, so that's why it's a range of 0.064 to 0.070.
But there are portions of the cut in the bone that are as narrow as 0.064, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Nothing further.
All right, thank you. You are excused. All right, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, it's now about 12:45. We'll excuse you for lunch and ask you to be here just before 2 o'clock, if you would, please. So you've got about an hour and 10 minutes. Thank you very much. All right, the jury's out. We're recessed for